I'm Councillor Ian Edwards, Leader of the Council, and I chair Cabinet. There being no members of the public present, there is no need for me to go through the normal health and safety announcements, but I would ask everybody present to please make sure their devices turn to silent. We'll move straight into the agenda. Agenda item 1, Mark. Apologies, please.
Thank you. Apologies from Councillor Eddie Lavery.
Thank you, noted. And item 2, declarations of interest in matters before this meeting. Colleagues, are there any additional notifications? None recorded. Thank you. 3 is to approve the minutes of the last meeting. They are on pages 1 to 12. Are the minutes agreed? Agreed. Item 4 is to confirm there will be items in both part 1, the public, and in part 2, the private part of the meeting. We will break the link online between part 1 and part 2, and should any member of the public join us, we will ask them to leave at that point. So we move straight into the public part 1. Item 5, the specialist resource provision for physical disabilities at Catford Infant School. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Leader. So agenda item 5. This evening Cabinet is asked to consider the proposals to close the physical disability special resource provision, the SRP, which I'll refer to moving forward at Catford Infant School. One of the reasons that this proposal has been put forward is due to the falling demand for places at the Catford Infant School specialist provision, in that the school itself has asked for a reduction. In addition, children with physical disabilities fully attend the mainstream school, although they will have their individual access arrangements as per their EHCP. There is an expectation in the 21st century that all schools are fully inclusive of children with a physical disability, and the majority of schools nowadays are DDA compliant to allow this integration. The pupils of Catford Infant School who have a physical disability all attend 100% of the mainstream classroom experience and will come out of class for particular therapies that are embedded into their individual EHCP plans. SRPs in schools are usually an additional space that allows children respite or away time from the classroom environment. However, Catford Infants has an alternative setup to this, in that there is no separate physical space where children are taught. All pupils are fully integrated into the classrooms for their entire timetable. As colleagues will be aware, SEN education has been on the local authorities' agenda for the last few years, if not more than that, and we have been looking at better ways of delivering education to our children with special educational needs. Part of that has been a sufficiency review. The Council looked at all schools' places, and from that we have formulated a plan for new schools, new units, as well as working with the spaces that are already available. Discussions started with Catford Infants in February 2024, and it was quickly assessed that the pupils on roll at the SRP at Catford were actually in mainstream classes and fully integrated with their mainstream peers. The school does not have a unit or a separate area like other schools. The consultation started on the 25th of September, ending on the 25th of October. During this time, there has been great interest from stakeholders, which included 2 signed petitions, as well as questions at full council in November, whereby at the time I stated that the children who are currently in the school should see no change. The proposal went to the Children's, Families and Education Select Committee, and their comments are on page 16 of our Cabinet agenda and page 5 of the report. As part of the Select Committee, officers gave assurance that the proposals to close the SRP will not impact the support provided by the school for the children with EHCPs, and that the school will continue to receive the same level of funding for those pupils currently on roll at the SRP. I will also add that the funding follows the child and not the school, and it's determined by the child's EHCP rather than the funding following the school itself. I would like to put on record this evening that Catford Infant School is a shining example of how well young children with special educational needs are able to integrate into a mainstream setting, and they have done an exceptional job on this. They are an inclusive school, and as such, they are a school that receives special educational needs exceptional funding, and we have advised the school that this will continue whilst the need is there. The recommendations this evening are on page 14, and that is that the Cabinet, in coming to a decision, has regarded the 292 responses and 2 petitions from the consultation in response to the proposed closure. And number 2, agrees that the closure of the specialist resource provision for children with physical disabilities at Catford Infant School. I therefore move.
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Brien. I completely and utterly understand the interest that our residents have shown in the proposal here and the concern that has been expressed through the petitions and presence at a council meeting. What is also very clear to me, though, is that the vision that we set out in our Hillingdon local area send an alternative provision strategy is absolutely the right one. That rather than Catford School being considered here as in some way losing out here, it's a case of us wishing to spread the best practice of Catford to every other school and ensuring that our policies and processes make all schools inclusive, so that disabled children have access to go to their local school, form local friends, and leisure connections within their own neighbourhood. Colleagues, are these recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 6, the Hillingdon Education Strategy. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you again, Leader. So agenda item 6 is the proposed education strategy, which sets out the main priorities for the Council's education team for maintained and academy schools, early years and further education providers for the next 5 years within Hillingdon. Hillingdon's vision is that all young people prepare for their adult life while they are educated at schools or other settings. There are 3 priorities detailed within the report. 1, every Hillingdon child and young person should benefit from high quality, supportive and inclusive learning in a good school or setting. Priority 2 is to prepare the children for adulthood. And priority 3, addressing the issues of the decade, namely the key issues that put some children and young people at risk of educational underachievement. The process for the education strategy started in 2022, whereby education had travelled through a number of turbulent years. Officers have worked with the data that has come out of this, and there have been many themes and strands that schools and education providers are now having to work with that they had not in the past. The strategy is now sensibly a 5-year strategy, as the priorities are long-term goals and can't all be fixed overnight or over a year as such. The strategy went to the Children's Family and Education Select Committee in November 2024, and they have made comment on page 52 of tonight's papers. The strategy is attached to the paperwork this evening on page 57. Before I put forward the recommendations, I would just like to say that there are a whole tranche of officers that have been involved in this huge piece of work, and I would like to thank Abby Preston and her team and Michael Hawkins, who also presented it to the Select Committee back in November. The recommendation is on page 51 that the Cabinet approve the Education Strategy 2024 to 2029, and I therefore move.
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Brien, and I wish to also add my thanks to the officers for having done that, and I know that our Chief Executive is hearing this and will take that back directly themselves. Thank you. Colleagues, the recommendations agreed.
Agreed.
Agenda item 7, extending the age range for admission to the assessment centre at Ruislip Gardens Primary School, South Ruislip. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you again, Leader. A positive agenda item to extend. So Cabinet this evening is asked to consider the outcome of the consultation with regards to extending the age range of the specialist assessment base at Ruislip Gardens Primary School. This is due to the growth in numbers of children with special educational needs and moving on further then to educational healthcare plans. Early identification will allow the Council to ensure that children are placed in the correct type of school settings early in their educational journey, and so that we can also gauge demand. The base is currently available to 3 to 5-year-olds at Ruislip Gardens School, and the proposal seeks to expand the age range to include children that are 2 years old where appropriate and necessary in exceptional circumstances. The consultation ran during September and October of this year, where stakeholders were invited to participate. There are 2 recommendations on page 86 of our pack, and I won't read them out, but I ask that they are agreed this evening.
Colleagues, are the recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 8, the proposal to lower the age range for 3 community schools to take 2-year-olds. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you again, Leader. So, agenda item 8, Cabinet is asked this evening to consider the outcome of the consultation with regards to lowering the age range for 3 schools, Colham Manor, Field End Infants and Manette Infants and Nursery Schools. In April 2024, the Government expanded the early years entitlement with an aim to support families and parents to return to work if they needed or wanted to. The proposed offer is to enhance the parental choice. Schools provide a different model compared with current childcare providers, whereby the provision in these 3 schools will be based around school hours and will not take away from the pool of current early years and childcare providers. The 3 recommendations are on page 102, and again, you can read them. I won't read them out, and I therefore move the recommendations.
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Brien. This ends the run of reports from your department. You wish, doesn't it? Oh, no. A licence deficit wants to come as well. Colleagues, are those recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
Right. I hope it's now your final one. The consideration of setting a licence deficit budget for any schools in the borough.
Thank you, Leader, and so do I. So this is an annual item that has been coming to the Cabinet for very many years now. Maintained schools have an annual duty to provide a balanced budget to their school's governing body. In exceptional circumstances whereby a governing body has explored all alternatives, a school may end up in a position with a deficit budget. At this point, the school, with the agreement of the governors, are required to notify the local authority to request to set a licence deficit budget. The licence enables schools to function and reposition themselves for the future. This year has seen an increase from 5 to 6 schools posting a deficit in 2024-2025. The names slightly amend each year. However, there are a couple of schools that will remain on there because they have got large deficits. The school's finance officers and education advisors will continue to meet with the schools to look at monitoring, supporting, reviewing and working on financial plans to see where improvements can be made. Some schools are finding it increasingly difficult to achieve a balanced budget. This may be due to undersubscription of pupil numbers, which is becoming more of an issue for all schools, and where schools may require guidance in rebalancing its expenditure to get back to a balanced position. The deficits come out of an already stretched, however ring-fence designated schools grant, but the council advances the funding before it receives the grant from the Department for Education. The recommendation are on page 133, and that's the Cabinet approves the application for a licence deficit for the schools outlined within the report. I therefore move.
Thank you. And at this point, please thank your staying for bringing together all of these reports. To do so, it's quite a wide spread of work, and all coming together at the same period of time is a demand, and I appreciate very much the additional effort the staff have gone into. Colleagues, the recommendations for item 9 agreed.
Agreed.
Item 10 is the statement of gambling policy, and in the absence of Councillor Lavery, I will introduce this. The Council is obliged to publish the statement of principles of gambling, and this has been subject to renewal and refreshing. The summary changes relating to this are on page 138. With those changes incorporated, colleagues are asked to agree the recommendation that this goes to full Cabinet for adoption as the update, full Council for the adoption of the updated statement of gambling policy. Is that recommendation agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 11, the Older Persons Plan Update. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Leader. The report before Cabinet updates us on the developments regarding the older people's services. There are no costs arising directly, as the services cited are covered through existing budget setting process. This report is the continuing commitment to support our older residents. I will just highlight a few services. In response to the cut in winter fuel payments, the Council has introduced 3 new initiatives using the Household Support Fund to support our pensioners. Details are on our website, and support will be given to those who need support to navigate the online application. The fund will also be used to provide food and meals through the support service. Warm Welcome Centres will provide free hot drinks, a nominated health champion who can sign posts to other services. We have an exemplary Falls partnership which was formed in January, and it includes our partners with Public Health, CNWL, H for All, Age UK Hillingdon and Adult Social Care. Brunel University has evaluated the Strength and Balance programme here, and 74% of respondents reported improvement in their balance and 80% improvement in control over falls. Age UK have secured 1.7 million for older residents, and in the befriending service they have had face-to-face appointments with 1,544 of our residents, which will do much to improve their mental health. There are many services provided by our partners, together with Hillingdon Council, to keep our older residents healthy, supported and active. I'd like to thank the Scrutiny Health and Social Care Committee for their comments. The recommendation is that Cabinet notes the activities underway to support our older people in Hillingdon.
Colleagues, is this report noted? Thank you. Agenda item 12, the Council's budget medium-term financial forecast. This is at public document Pack B and is also subject to a Cabinet addendum sheet which has been circulated. Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Leader. This item deals with the financial budget for the upcoming financial year 2025-26 and also sets out the medium-term financial strategy for the 5-year period ending 2029-30. It's set out on pages 1 to 128 of Pack B. This will be submitted to our residents and to our select committees in order for them to consider and provide their comments. With your permission, Leader, within this report, I will also provide a very brief update on the Month 7 budget monitoring position for the current 24-25 financial year. This has been a challenging budget to put together in the context of a number of factors. Firstly, central government funding has decreased in real terms by 70% since 2011. Population growth in Hillingdon is exceeding the national average, but is not being reflected in the funding which we receive. There are foreseeable static levels of business rates income, and indeed there are no signals to suggest that any of these trends are likely to reverse in the foreseeable future. The system of funding for local authorities is widely considered by many to be broken, with a particular need for the new system of taxation to replace business rates, and with a greater allocation of the total take accruing to councils. The Chancellor's autumn budget statement has added to that pressurised environment, particularly as a result of the announced increases in employers' national insurance and the national minimum wage, both of which we expect and forecast to add considerable cost inflation to our outsourced contracts. Legacy inflation and sustained higher interest rates continue to profoundly depress economic confidence for families, businesses and local authorities alike. As a consequence, we continue to see increased demand for our frontline services, particularly in the areas of social care, housing, homelessness and asylum seekers. As a point of emphasis, I must remind colleagues that the Provisional Local Government Finance Settlement for 25-6 has yet to be received, and therefore there is inevitable uncertainty as to the precise positions on government grant funding, business rates and the detail of the autumn budget statement. But I must emphasise that these are not problems which are unique to Hillingdon. As I reported at Council last week, budget overspends amongst councils in England are expected to amount to £6.2 billion over the next 2 financial years. And there is an ever-growing queue of authorities seeking exceptional financial support from central government. Turning to our general fund, I must advise colleagues that the budget monitoring process for month 7 which is up to October 2024, indicates a further overspend against budget of £2 million, which will take us up to an aggregate overspend for the full 24-25 financial year to £8.9 million. This will give rise to reserves available to carry over into the next year of £26.2 million. I will provide a much fuller analysis of the budget monitoring position at a future Cabinet meeting when we consider month 9, which is the position which will be arrived at for December 2024. Turning to the budget setting for the next year and our forecast for the 4 following years, it has been necessary to create a strategy which will absorb the cost pressures described above, whilst at the same time launching a process which will see the rebuilding of our reserves, which are uncomfortably low at the present time. Essentially, we have two viable options, I would say, in front of us. We either increase our income or we reduce our expenditure. Given the stagnation of government grant and business rates income, the only material driver income open to us is in respect of council tax. Hillingdon has consistently over the years espoused a policy of low taxation, and the strongest expression of this was when we froze council tax for a period of 10 years. This has given us one of the very lowest levels of council tax in London, notwithstanding the recent necessary increases, which have been below the referendum ceiling. Therefore, the option of a substantial increase in council tax is rejected as being in conflict with our policy of low taxation, which we will continue to adhere to. The other meaningful option in front of us is to undertake a fundamental remodelling of the council's operating model, such that management tiers and structures are redesigned in order to drive out material levels of cost, whilst at the same time maintaining and preserving frontline services. This is the option selected within this consultation budget, and it will see to the delivery of an additional £25 million worth of savings across the term of the MTFS. Faced with this economic environment, it has been necessary to apply a 2.99% increase to core council tax, plus a 2% increase in social care precept for 25-26. However, I must emphasise that this still leaves us with one of the lowest levels of council tax in London. Fees and charges are being increased across the board by 5%, albeit that this does reflect a greater increase than the current CPI. This increase allows us to catch up on underlying delivery costs, which have increased as a result of earlier and higher inflation. Our resultant fees and charges structure will still prove to be modest in comparison with neighbouring authorities, and will leave us in the bottom quartile in terms of fees and charges per resident in London. This forecast is cautious as to changes in government grant funding and business rates. We await the arrival of the provincial settlement in order to identify any additional income which may accrue. Inflation, even at current reduced levels, will still add £35 million to the authority's cost base across the term of the MTFS. Demand-led growth will add to our costs by £31 million. The major contributory factors being waste, adult social care, homeless prevention, special educational needs transport, and looked after children. Corporate items, comprising provisions for known and potential risks and exposures, have added a further £37 million in 25-26 and cover areas such as the expected impact of employers' national insurance and the national minimum wage on contracted out services, cost rebasing, bad debts, concessionary fees, and increased capital financing costs. Excuse me. Our savings programme, which comprises both the outputs from zero-based budgeting and the reform of our target operating model, will yield £65.2 million across the 5-year term. We have a substantial capital expenditure programme of £342.8 million across the 5-year term, all of which will be achieved with modest and affordable levels of external debt. Indeed, external debt is projected to increase by only £42 million as a consequence of this programme, and this is largely due to the use of capital grants and the utilisation of capital receipts from the divestment of redundant capital assets. All of this will leave us with a revenue budget gap of £6.4 million in 25-26. However, we do generate budget surpluses in every following year as the benefits of the savings programme start to kick in. Indeed, in aggregate, this MTFS indicates an aggregate budget surplus across the 5-year term as we start to rebuild our reserves. Turning to the housing revenue account, rents will increase by 2.7%, and this being based upon the prevailing rate of inflation measured as CPI plus 1% as at September 2024. Capital expenditure is a demanding £745 million across the 5-year term, and this is focused on building out our housing stock by 17%, whilst at the same time improving and enhancing the quality of our existing stock. All years indicate balanced budgets. So, colleagues, this MTFS represents a hard-headed, realistic view of the environment in which we are compelled to operate. It will entail some tough decisions, but it upholds our key principles of low taxation and the maintenance of key frontline services. Leader, I therefore move recommendations 1 to 8, as set out on page 2 and 3 of the report. I also move the request for delegated authority for me, in consultation with the Corporate Director of Finance, to consider and authorise, if appropriate, the request for the purchase of grounds maintenance equipment using the current year's budgeted capital contingency as set out in Recommendation 9. Furthermore, I also move items 1 to 4 as outlined in the addendum, which was published today and which address a number of minor corrections to fees and charges. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Goddard. In the spirit of openness, I just wish to advise residents, that whilst fees and charges generally are being uplifted by 5%, the fee and charge that they are most likely to experience, the one of parking, is being raised. Proposal is to raise it above that, and I wish to draw attention to that point rather than be suggested that we're trying to in some way hide it. Whilst the raising of that parking fee is significantly above the 5%, it still delivers a parking charge per hour lower than our neighbouring boroughs and still keeps our parking rates amongst the most competitive in London. Colleagues, there are a range of recommendations here. They are recommendations 1 to 9 within the report itself, with recommendation 1 or 2 amended by the addendum sheet and a new recommendations 10 and 11. So are the recommendations as set out in the report amended by the addendum sheet agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 13, the infrastructure funding statement. Councillor Tuckwell.
Thank you, Leader. I'm pleased to present the infrastructure funding statement for the financial year 2023-2024. This statutory report, required under the Community Infrastructure Levy regulations, outlines how the Council has collected, allocated and spent its SIL and 106 planning obligations over the past year. The purpose of this statement is to ensure transparency and accountability in the use of developer contributions, demonstrating how these funds are effectively used to support sustainable growth and improve the lives of our residents. This report was recently reviewed by the Resident Services Select Committee, whose comments and insights are greatly appreciated and are outlined on page 169. Following their feedback, key areas for improvement include enhancing transparency, implementing new IT systems and future funding utilised as efficiently as possible. The light's on here but not on there.
Oh, fine. Just making sure it can be heard online.
So use this one here.
No.
Okay. So carry on, Leader?
Please.
Okay. Some highlights from the report include, in the 2023-24 financial year, Hillingdon collected 2.7 million in SIL, which has been allocated to significant projects such as the new Platinum Leisure Centre in West Drayton and various community infrastructure initiatives through the Chrysalis programme. The Council also received 4.9 million in new home income, spent 1.3 million on projects including affordable housing, air quality, local park improvements, enhanced community enhancements and investments in apprenticeships, training and skills development in the construction sector. The largest single contribution was £3 million to the Council's Section 106 Carbon Offset Fund from a new data centre under construction in Hayes. This evening the Cabinet is asked to note the infrastructure funding statement for publication on the Council's website and to approve a delegation to make any minor amendments required prior to publication if necessary. I therefore move the three recommendations as outlined on page 168. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tuckwell, those recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agenda item 14 is a report provided as a public preview of confidential reports. It is provided to give more information to members of the public around matters that we will now be considering in part 2 of the meeting. We're now going to close part 1, the public part, break the link and invite members of the public to please leave the meeting. Thank you.